Good morning. Welcome to Cheyenne's Forum. Today is June 25th. Hello, Tom.
Hello. How are you today, Cheyenne?
Very good. How are you?
Good.
Welcome. Yeah, Tom is our dear friend. He come here every week to talk about the news with us. And thank you so much for your time. And then today, Tom, we have very big topics, two topics. One is today, the other one is about 50 plus years ago. Today's topic is about Julian Assange. He is free finally, and so many people are happy for him. And so people just wonder first, what really happened about his case, and more importantly, what's the next? What he will do? Will he his next movement? So this is something that we're really interesting to learn. And the other thing is about John F. Kennedy. President Trump just told everyone to the world that he will release the document of John F. Kennedy. So this is a big, actually a problem about American history. What really happened about John F. Kennedy and why? That's more important. Why the secret is just kept for so long? And is there anything to do with today? If not, why President Trump cannot release the document of John F. Kennedy's assassination last term? So these are the questions we would like to discuss today. And then before we start, I like to introduce like Tom, my dear friend. He works in FBI for 30 years, and he served as assistant director of FBI for 5 years. So, well, thank you so much. So, Tom, what do you think about Assange? Are you surprised he finally got free?
Um, a little bit. I think that this has been long overdue. You had other people in high places say that he should be pardoned or his sentence commuted or something, let him out. And to see pictures of him now, he's in frail health. He's been locked up indoors. First in an embassy and then in a prison in the United Kingdom.
Mhm,
And obviously, it's taken a toll on his health. So
mhm,
he doesn't look very healthy. His
mhm,
attorneys and others have been lobbying for the government to finally let him go. And so what they're doing is they struck a plea deal with him
mhm,
where he's going to plead guilty um, to releasing these documents, and then they'll say time served. Now, one of the sentences that happens when you're convicted of something is if you've already been in jail a long time or
right,
locked up a long time, the government can call that time served. You
mhm,
served the equivalent of any sentence that we would have given you, from the beginning. And
mhm,
that's what they're going to do in his case. So they're taking him. What's interesting is um, nobody knew, including me, that we had a judge in the Marianas. And, so he's being transported to the Marianas Islands, a possession of the United States. But there is a U.S. District Court judge there, apparently, who
mhm,
can accept the plea and
mhm.
then decree that the plea bargain will apply, that
Sure.
he will be considered time served
Mhm,
and be set free so that he can return to his home country, which is Australia.
mhm. So people are surprised that he does not need to come to the States, which is really big because, some people here are really hate him.
No, I know. And I think that the deal was that his attorneys knew
Mhm,
do this deal and find the most out of the way judge in the entire United States court system and agree to do the plea there.
right.
And I think part of that is they didn't want him coming to Washington or Virginia or somewhere in the United States. I think because they feared the government would renege on the deal and keep him, throw him
Mhm,
back in jail and say no deal.
right, right, right.
So I think that's why, they'll all give a sigh of relief when the sentencing is over and he's on the plane to Australia.
Mhm,
I think even now they don't have, and with good reason, they
right.
don't have reason to believe that the U.S. is going to be honest in all of these deals.
Right, right. So do you think he will keep doing what he had done, telling the truth?
I don't know. It's a good question just simply because of, his health, and he's been locked up a long time and he's not out there cultivating sources to send him information. So I don't know. I think maybe if somebody
Hmm.
knowledgeable from inside the government, our government, or another allied government
Hmm.
sends him information that's too good to resist, he may go ahead and put it out again.
Hmm. So what do you think about him? You consider him as a hero?
I kind of do, because I think that much of what we learned from him, we wouldn't have known. And I
Right.
think a good example is the, just the improper actions of the Democratic National Committee when
Hmm.
Trump was running against Hillary Clinton.
Hmm.
You have a situation that's widely suspected that one of the analysts at that committee, a computer expert named Seth Rich, it's
Hmm.
widely rumored that he was murdered because he stole documents out of the DNC system
Hmm.
and sent them to Julian Assange. And
Hmm.
among those documents were, what Hillary Clinton was doing that was wrong, what other members of her campaign, um, how they cheated Bernie Sanders to make sure he didn't get nominated. And so all of these things happen. And then mysteriously, Seth Rich is walking down a dark street in Washington, D.C.,
Right.
and gets shot and killed. And
Hmm.
when the police come, his expensive jewelry wasn't taken, his wallet with money, nothing was taken except he's dead. And so the rumors started flying at that time. And Julian Assange has hinted that he might have been the source of much of the material, but he did not confirm it specifically,
Hmm.
uh, because I think partly he didn't want it to appear that it was his fault that
Right.
he was killed.
Hmm.
So I think that's a big part of what happened in that case.
Hmm.
Um, but Julian Assange did have the material, and much of it, some of it was pretty, accusations against Hillary's campaign manager, John Podesta, that he
Hmm.
was somehow involved in child trafficking,
Right.
that kind of thing. And so some of the material that came out of all that was pretty damaging
Right.
to Hillary Clinton, her campaign, people associated with her campaign, and the Democratic National Committee itself.
Right. So talking about Hillary Clinton, what do you think about her case? Do you think she ever will got the investigation, or she
I
just
think she's going to stay free. I think she's going to, the fact that the time has gone by now, and I don't think anything bad is going to happen or that she's going to be prosecuted. Now, what she clearly did was illegal. When you have Congress subpoena 33,000 emails from her and then she destroys them. Now, one of the things that a lot of people aren't aware, if you're in a government position, whether you're an FBI agent or whether you're, a member of the State Department or the military or an ambassador, when you're doing U.S. government business, it's required that you do that on a U.S. government computer. And
hmm.
the reason is that the records in that computer are forever.
Hmm.
They can't be deleted. You can't reboot your computer and those records are gone. That system goes into servers maintained by the US government and you can't tamper with them.
Sure.
And a good sample of that was Ollie North way back when he
Hmm.
was involved in the Iran Contra and
Hmm.
working, as a national security advisor. He thought he was deleting all the files, concerning arms for, trade to Iran, which was illegal. Well,
Hmm.
lo and behold, he might have deleted the computer on his desktop or any devices, personal devices, any of that.
Hmm.
But that information, those files were still in the U.S. government computer system, and
Hmm.
that came up. That's why he was
Hmm.
charged in that case originally with having those documents.
Hmm.
So the law is pretty specific, and I remember this from my time in the FBI. It's very specific.
Hmm.
So you care, the FBI laptop, my desktop computer, knowing that that information is forever, but also any handheld devices. Now, in those days, we had Blackberries. Blackberry was still one of the most, before iPhones, was one of the most popular brands in the world. And, uh, and I actually had two. I had one that was the US government Blackberry to do government business. And secondly, I had my personal
Right.
because, if I'm traveling, which I traveled a lot, I had to be able to check with a company if they were sending me a bill for something or doing personal business that had nothing to do with the computer. I mean, with the government on my computer. So that's why that's always been a strict policy.
Sure.
Now with the modern phones, they can switch the hard drive from your personal stuff to government stuff. But in those days, you had to have a separate device. And
Mhm.
so that's one of the reasons Hillary Clinton was under investigation by the FBI for the activities of the Clinton Foundation.
Mhm.
Now, Hillary was very smart and she broke the glass ceiling because she's the first woman in the world to run a major organized crime group, the foundation. And what she figured out was you have other politicians accepting campaign funds for bribes or direct bribes or things like that for a few $1,000s and then getting sentenced. The governor of Illinois at the time, when I came back to Washington, Blagojevich, was sentenced to 14 years in prison because he was accepting bribes to pick one person or another to replace Obama's Senate seat. When President Obama became president, he was a U.S. Senator from Illinois. So
Mhm.
now his seat, the governor can appoint a person to be the temporary senator until the upcoming election.
Mhm.
And all of these politicians were trying to bribe Blagojevich to
Mhm.
pick me, and I'll give you thousands of dollars. So
Mhm.
he gets the FBI is alerted to this and wiretaps him and gets the necessary information. He's convicted of bribery, of corruption, and sentenced to 14 years in federal prison.
Mhm.
So now Hillary comes along. Well, she's doing illegal, accepting all of the money from the foundation that was supposed to be a charity,
Mhm.
except the Clintons were living very large off the charity, which was improper or illegal. And
Mhm.
so she didn't want the government to know what she was doing or when she was doing government business. So what she did is have the day she became Secretary of State, she alerts the computer people at State Department, I want you to install a computer in my home that's not on the system so that it's separate. And everybody's like, well, you can't do that. You're not supposed to. It's illegal, but they obey and they install that system for her. And later, it's realized she's under investigation for the money she was taking from oligarchs all over the world, millions and millions of dollars going into the foundation, which was pretty clear. All of these oligarchs around the world weren't losing sleep because people in Africa were dying of malaria or AIDS, and we have to do something. We're going to contribute to the charity that's going to do something about the health of the world. No, no, no. They wanted favor from the Secretary of State of the United States so that they could do special deals and get away with it.
Mhm.
And she wanted to be able to get the money or the benefit. And so the foundation was a perfect way to launder money. Later, it comes out that they've accepted hundreds of millions of dollars. And, and it's pretty serious.
Mhm.
And Congress subpoenas her records, subpoenas her Blackberries and all of that, which she does not comply with. And then she destroys, with hammers and bleach bit and everything else, she destroys the devices,
Right.
thinking that's it. She's taken care of all that information. So then you have the famous speech given by James Comey, director of the FBI at the time, where he's making a public statement
Mhm.
where he's basically citing all of the things, the terrible things she did that were illegal. And then at the end of his speech, he says, however, no reasonable prosecutor would prosecute her for these offenses. So I'm not recommending prosecution. Now, one of the odd things that happened in that, the FBI director has no business ever recommending, you do your investigations, you present it to the attorneys at the Department of Justice, they decide, or the
Right,
Attorney General decides. Now,
right,
what happened a couple of weeks earlier, Hillary Clinton is traveling and she has a meeting with Bill Clinton, who just happened to be on the ground in that airport.
right.
And so here she's in charge of the investigation of his wife, improperly meets with him. And, the meeting's at least 30 minutes or more. And later she says, we were only talking about grandchildren and our families. We didn't discuss Hillary's case
Mm-hmm,
or anything like that.
mm-hmm,
So, that was the kind of thing that was going on.
mm-hmm,
Uh, and so now you have the attorney general recuse herself from making a decision in the Hillary case because of that meeting
mm-hmm.
with Clinton. And so as a result of it, she defers. Kind of go with the recommendation of the FBI. Well, that's not proper. The proper decision is if she can't make the decision because she's tainted somehow, that's fine.
Mm-hmm.
There's deputy attorney generals, there's
Right,
deputy attorney generals, there's hundreds of people that it could be delegated down to,
right,
not delegated to the head of the FBI. Now,
right.
the problem is once Comey says that, there's no chance to prosecute Hillary by anybody else at any time
Mm-hmm.
because they realize that what will happen, Hillary's put on trial, prosecution, makes whatever case they're going to make. And Hillary, the first witness for Hillary, is going to be calling James Comey. And, isn't it true? You said no reasonable prosecutor. Yes, that's true. Case dismissed. That's the end of that.
Yeah.
And you had former U.S. attorneys on TV and on the other channels saying that was ridiculous. Joe DiGenova, who had been U.S. attorney in Washington, D.C., and had been a senior official at the Department of Justice, and his wife was a senior official at DOJ, and they commented that's improper. They would have taken that case in a heartbeat. So,
It's
so
so.
Hillary got away with that. That's
Mhm.
why during the campaign in 2016, Trump supporters, when that
Mhm.
became, this speech is in July, and of course you have the campaign going through the summer up to the November election. That's
Mhm.
why when Trump was holding these rallies,
Mhm.
the audience, in the people in the crowd were chanting, lock her up, lock
Right,
her up. That's
right.
why, because they knew she had gotten away with a very serious crime.
It's crime.
So
Also, it's so erratic. Democrat always said no one is above the law, but they are. And it's a very similar situation like today, right? The Congress asking for the videotape from DOJ, and DOJ said, no, 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 we will not give it to you. It's just like what they did in Hillary Clinton's case.
yeah, and it's strictly political because the special prosecutor, her in that case, says
Right,
he didn't even though he basically said Biden is guilty as sin for taking the documents that he took while he was a senator, while he was a vice president, and
how
disclosing classified material to the author that's writing a book
hmm
about his administration, which
hmm
that's illegal to give up classified material to a person who has no right to have it. So in any
Sure.
event, her says, "Oh yeah, Biden did all these serious offense, all these violations. However, basically what he's saying, his mental ability is so weak, his
hmm
memory is gone, that it would be unfair to try to prosecute him
hmm
in that condition. But it's okay to leave him as
Right,
president of the United States and
right,
have him run again, like he's doing now, to be reelected president. But to
right,
basically say he's too feeble mentally, his cognitive skills are so bad
right.
that he really shouldn't be in court trying to defend himself."
Sure. So we really need to thanks to Assange. If not him, we will not know about this details about Hillary Clinton and what he's done. And I just very curious about why the Democrats always get away from their um criminal behavior.
I think part of it is just completely intimidate the Republican Party. So you have weak speakers of the House, weak committee chairman, and they just really they seem like they don't pull the trigger when they've got the evidence. Now, part of the problem now is that you've got a couple of committees in the House that are finally investigating. Don't forget, they couldn't open investigations under Pelosi.
Right.
So the first 2 years of Biden administration, he had it made because under Pelosi, they're not going to be able to do anything. But
Mhm.
then when the Republicans gain a 1 or 2 or 3 seat majority in the midterm elections,
Mhm.
now the speaker, first it's McCormick, then it's Johnson now, but the speaker gets to decide who the committee chairmen are, what investigations the committees can do, what
Mhm.
subpoenas they can issue,
Mhm.
and all of those factors are decided by the Speaker of the House. Very important position. Interestingly, the
Mhm.
Speaker of the House is number 3 in succession to the president. So you
Sure.
have the president, if he can't serve, the vice president, and if he or she can't serve, Speaker of the House is
Mhm.
now the president.
Mhm.
Very, very important position, even just for that.
Mhm.
So, yeah, they're doing in 2 years' time, they're gathering the documents of bribes to the Biden family, to Biden himself, to Hunter, the whole situation with Burisma, Hunter being on their executive board
Mhm.
in Ukraine,
Right.
all of the things that Biden did.
Mhm.
And nobody's asking, here's a guy that was in a career civil servant in the Senate, and he's got 3 houses in Delaware, one on the beach, one on, all three are mansions.
Mhm.
That how did he afford that on a
Mhm.
public salary?
Mhm.
So that's come up, but it's like he has a free ride basically.
Right.
Nobody wants to prosecute him because he's feeble, he's cognitively impaired, he's all of these things. So
This is
that's
a
what you see now. You see the Democrats circle the wagons
right.
and protect them,
Right. Right. So and
including look at the Democratic leader of the Senate, Chuck
mhm.
Schumer.
Mhm. Yeah,
A
right.
couple of weeks ago, the House files articles of impeachment against the Homeland Security Secretary, Mayorkas.
Mhm.
Now, under the Constitution, if you're going to take a senior official out of the government, remove him, convict him, it
Mhm.
has to be by impeachment. President, vice president, judges,
Mhm.
members of the cabinet.
Mhm.
So, under impeachment, the House of Representatives files the articles of impeachment. They vote for it. So
Right.
that's the equivalent of an indictment in a criminal investigation. So they charge Mayorkas with not doing his job, not defending the Constitution like he swore an oath to do.
Mhm.
They deliver those papers to the Senate. Now, what's supposed to happen is the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court or another Supreme Court justice becomes the trial judge.
Mhm.
The trial court is basically the U.S. Senate,
Right.
and the jury is all of the senators.
Mhm.
Now, to find a person guilty under impeachment, they needed 2/3 of the senators vote guilty. That's 67.
Right.
But now these articles, you remember they impeached Trump twice, once while he was president, once after he was president.
Mhm.
And obviously they couldn't get the votes and he's acquitted. But in the case of Mayorkas, the articles of impeachment arrive in the Senate and Chuck Schumer tears them up and throws them away. So now that's unconstitutional. That's probably illegal. Chuck Schumer should probably be charged with not doing his job.
Right.
But with 3, 4, 5 months to go in the election, that'll slide. Nobody will bother with that.
See, that's the thing. Nobody will bother with that.
Yeah,
We just let it happen again and again and again.
right.
So hopefully we will have enough Republican just stand up and say no and do some real thing about that. Because what you described the Democrats do is against the law. So if nobody's
No,
above
they
the,
don't worry about the law. You have Biden uh, come out and say, okay, I'm forgiving all these tens of millions of dollars in student loans. He doesn't have the authority to do that. Goes to the Supreme Court. Supreme Court says you can't do that. He does it anyway. And now what? Supreme Court doesn't have an army to send to the White House and say, go get them. They
Mhm.
don't have policemen assigned to the Supreme Court. All the Supreme Court do is complain to the judicial branch, or they are the judicial, complain to the Attorney General, do something, which isn't going to happen. So Biden has violated the law,
Right,
violated the direct order of the Supreme Court
right,
that he cannot, and he's done more of it.
right,
Like
right,
when they decide to tell him you can't do that, it's like I'm going to even do more.
right.
I don't care what you tell me.
So Democrats right now is not a regular party. It's a perfect destroyer. And so the other thing people are really worried about is the safety of Assange. So someone tried to kill him after he's free. So what do you think about the possibility? Some people like to keep him silent forever. What do
It
you?
happened. Sure. The rumors were during the Trump administration that Mike Pompeo, when he was head of the CIA, wanted to put a contract out and kill him. Then, 5 years, 6 years ago. So, I don't know where that investigation ever went, if it went anywhere, but
Mhm,
that was the rumor that the CIA wanted him dead because of the complete embarrassment that he had done to the agency and the fear of the additional sources he might have to put more out or to
mhm,
develop more sources to put stuff in the future.
mhm,
Now, one of the really famous cases from several years ago was a guy working for Rand Corporation named Daniel Ellsberg.
mhm,
He was a member of that group, and they were given a task by the Defense Department: analyze the Vietnam War,
mhm,
see what we did. Was it good, bad? You name it.
mhm,
Rand Corporation uh, publishes a very detailed account saying basically we'll never win. What we're doing isn't going to succeed. All this bad information. And more specifically, the Defense Department, going back to Robert McNamara, Secretary of Defense, and others, the head of the Army in Vietnam, General Westmoreland, they're lying. They're saying we're winning. If we only get a few more troops, we'll win.
mhm,
And that few more troops argument lasted after the assassination of Kennedy. Comes out later, Kennedy wanted to pull our advisors and get out.
mhm,
He gets killed, assassinated. We'll talk about that in a minute. But in any event, Kennedy had issued a memo shortly before he was killed saying, I want to withdraw. We had 15,000 US military advisors in South Vietnam. I want them out. And I
mhm,
don't want to dispatch any actual military, soldiers or anything else into Vietnam.
mhm,
He had learned from the French, who had been there for 10 years, that you can't win. It's a quagmire. Don't get in. You'll never get out. All of that. So Kennedy says that he was convinced we're going to get out.
mhm,
Meantime, he gets assassinated November 22nd, 1963.
mhm.
Within 2 days, Lyndon Johnson countermands his memo. Says, oh, no, 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 we're not pulling out. We're going to put more in. Now, within about 2 years of the Johnson presidency, we went from 15,000 advisors, should have gone to zero. And
Mhm.
instead, 2.5, 3 years later, we have over 500,000 troops in South Vietnam. And so, completely that's the military industrial complex. They made probably a couple $1 trillion over that period because, we start escalating. Johnson starts escalating our manpower in Vietnam, 1964.
Mhm.
The last helicopters leaving the Saigon embassy with refugees on top, April 1975. So 11 years. And we've expended all that money, all the munitions, all of the personnel and everything. And so
Mm-hmm.
the military industrial complex makes a fortune in Vietnam that they would not have made if Kennedy was still president.
Mm-hmm.
So those are the kind of things. So now, meantime, Ellsberg in the Rand report basically says much of this. We can't win, we're lying, on and on. So the report, what happens is he steals the report and photocopies it himself. Long process, couple of people helping him.
Mm-hmm.
But the documents that he's going to submit as the final report to the Pentagon, they're copying those documents illegally.
Mm-hmm.
And then Ellsberg turns those documents over to the Washington Post and the New York Times. And this results in a huge lawsuit. The case goes that they should be prohibited from publishing, prohibited from obtaining those documents, possibly criminally charged with
Mm-hmm.
possession of the stolen documents. Case goes to the U.S. Supreme Court.
Mm-hmm.
Supreme Court comes back and says they didn't take the documents. So
Mm-hmm.
we're not going to look at how they got them. Once they do have them, it's in public interest to put them out. So therefore, no punishment to the New York Times, no punishment to the Washington Post for putting out the stolen material.
Mm-hmm.
So now you compare that to Assange in 2016, where he's publishing material pertaining to the records of the Democratic National Committee and the tricks and deals they're pulling.
Mm-hmm.
And, so that's what starts this case, that people are saying that first of all, they're saying he's publishing the material, but it was really stolen from the Democrats by the Russians. Russians do everything, right? So the Russians downloaded, they hacked into the DNC computers and downloaded it.
Mm-hmm.
Now later, the DNC hires a US company called CrowdStrike. A former FBI Cyber Assist.Director is the head of CrowdStrike.
Mm-hmm.
And they get asked to testify later. And they testify that the amount of material that was taken off the DNC computer was so voluminous, there was so much of it, that they couldn't have done that by hacking alone. The wiring into the system, going through the internet, that the pipes are too small to take all of that. However, if you put an external device and plug it into the computer, you can download rapidly.
Right.
And so CrowdStrike says they think that's what happened. They don't think the Russians could have downloaded that much material, that it was somebody at the DNC. Well, then what happens? The suspicion goes on Julian Assange and his people stealing it and obtaining stolen documents. So now our government wants to go after him because WikiLeaks is putting out material that it was obtained by theft, by stolen, by stealing documents or stealing information off the computers. So that's what he basically. So if you went back to the precedent of the Pentagon Papers, Daniel Ellsberg, and you would have the precedent that Julian Assange, once he gets that material, whether it's from Snowden or someone at the DNC or Manning, the Army member that gave him documents that his sentence later commuted by Obama. But however WikiLeaks got those documents doesn't matter. It's in the public interest that they get published.
Right.
So therefore, Assange shouldn't have been prosecuted.
Right.
But our CIA, our military, our intelligence community are screaming bloody murder. He's got to be prosecuted. He's got to be extradited to the United States. And so that's when Assange in London, he takes up basically the embassy of Ecuador, I believe, and protects him. Says,
Mhm.
okay, you could stay in our embassy. And then embassies throughout the world where they exist actually don't belong to the country they're in. They belong to the country that has their diplomats there. So if this is an embassy of Ecuador, it's Ecuadorian property.
Mhm.
So it doesn't matter what the British say,
Mhm.
we can't go in there. He's protected there. The
Right.
military of the UK can't go into the facility. Now we
Mhm.
have about 200 embassies in Washington, D.C. Same
Right.
thing. Those
Right.
embassies are all the property of whatever country belongs to that embassy.
Right.
So,
Seems like we have so much dark thing need to cover for CIA, for FBI, for these agent. And then we're talking about the JFK case. So what's behind? Why they keep it for so long? It's over 50 years already. Even
oh yeah, well they have millions of pages of documents
hmm
pertaining to the JFK, later the Warren Commission, and all of that.
hmm
Now, much has come out, in the last couple of years about the assassination and about how much lying our government did about the people involved, let's say. Let's start with Lee Harvey Oswald.
hmm
Lee Harvey Oswald, it turns out later, was not a true defector to the Soviet Union. He was not a true communist. He didn't truly hate the United States.
hmm
He was working as a technician at the U.S. military base in Atsugi, Japan. Now,
hmm
that military base dispatched the U-2 spy planes to fly over the Soviet Union and take pictures, trying, helping to figure out where are their nuclear facilities? Where
hmm
would they be launching nuclear missiles? Where should we target if we end up in war with them? So a number, a number of people in the U.S. military, U.S. Marines, Navy, some other ones, suddenly, within a short period of time, want to be communists. They want to defect. And it was a program run by the intelligence community, originally by naval investigations. And ONI, they're working with the CIA. So the deal is that they recruit US military, people like Oswald, to say, I'm a defector. I want to be a communist. Here's my passport. I'm going to Russia, going to the Soviet Union. And then they go. Well, the KGB, which is the equivalent of the CIA in the Soviet Union at that time, the KGB is pretty smart. They realize, isn't it interesting? All of these US military people that have technical information suddenly want to come to our beloved land and
hmm
defect, become citizens of the Soviet Union. So when they get to Moscow, Moscow assigns them, wherever they want, and then assigns KGB officers to pair up with them, female officers.
hmm
So Oswald, they send him to Minsk, which is still the capital of Belarus. Now, it was part of the Soviet Union
hmm
at that time, late 50s. So he gets assigned, and they give him an apartment. And his job, basically, we don't have the electronic devices like today or the internet like today. So his job is to go see, how do things work? How do the elevators work? When you buy something in a store, how do they ring it up? How does that work? All these different aspects of life in the Soviet Union. He's supposed to gather as much information, write it down, and then bring it back to the US, and then bring it back to the CIA and naval intelligence, and have them analyze it so we could get an idea how sophisticated is the Soviet system, the way
Sure.
their stores and you name it, the way their machinery operates, and that. Now, what they did is that they don't trust they know our people are coming over there to spy on them. They know they're not true defectors, truly wanting to be communists. So Oswald comes over there. They assign him to go to Minsk. They set him up in a nice apartment. And then what they do is they assign a female KGB officer
Mhm.
to liaison with the American. And in
Mhm.
this case, it's Marina, who he later marries. Marina Oswald. Then what they do, the plan is that that person then marries our person. And
Mhm.
then when the tour of duty, a year or two, the so-called spy says, never mind, I want to go back to the U.S. Give me
Mhm.
my passport back. Now, Oswald gets his U.S. passport back in about 2 months.
Mhm.
When you're applying from scratch in those days, it took more than 2 months to get it. So
Mhm.
how does that happen so quickly? But
Mhm.
Oswald later claims or it's claimed that he had notes that he took taped to his chest, flies to Rotterdam in the Netherlands, and
Mhm.
then meets, and turns the papers over to whoever was running that part of the investigation, CIA or Office of Naval Intelligence, ONI.
Mhm.
So Marina comes with him, now his dutiful wife. And I think by that time they have maybe one kid. Now, what the women would typically do is meet the American, convince the American that they're in love,
Mhm.
get married, come back to the US with the American,
Mhm.
and ha- start fights with their husband.
Husband. Mhm.
And then when the husband becomes violent, if he slaps the woman or whatever, that's it. I'm getting a divorce. I'm out of here.
Mhm.
Well, now she's a naturalized US citizen. Now
Right.
she can roam all over the US and spy on us.
Mhm.
So it
Mhm.
was a very prolific program. We
Sure.
thought benefiting us. The,
Mhm.
the Soviets thought benefiting them. You could
Mhm.
argue if it benefited anybody,
Win-win situation, huh?
win-win. So anyway, Marina doesn't have to get a divorce or any of that. They're already, starting to claim marital problems,
Mhm.
but she doesn't have to go through any of those motions or divorce or anything because her husband gets killed by Jack Ruby 2 days after the assassination of John Kennedy.
Mhm.
So that's kind of how that program worked. Well, now to this day, you still see when they refer to Lee Harvey Oswald, the lone assassin of JFK,
Right.
or he was a dedicated communist. That's why he defected. No, he
Mhm.
wasn't dedicated. All of these lies have gotten built around him.
Mhm.
The rumor is that Oswald, in the files of FBI and CIA that are still secret,
Mhm.
that it would show Oswald working for the US government when he went to the Soviet Union, that he was not a dedicated communist, and
Mhm.
that he probably didn't even pull the trigger
Mhm.
killing John Kennedy, that there were a number of assassins lined up.
Mhm.
Uh, Kennedy had many, many enemies: the
Mhm.
CIA, the military, Cuba, Castro, all of those factors that would kick in that situation.
Right.
Well, anyway, the files that might show all this material, and also, by the way, would show information that Oswald was also a paid FBI informant
Mhm.
uh, at the time of the assassination. But in any event, um, the fear is on the part of the government that those documents would incriminate the CIA mainly.
Mhm.
They would have coordinated
Right.
killing and even more coordinated the cover up afterward.
Right.
And the entire commission, the Warren Commission, was a designed cover up ordered by Johnson, President Johnson, to basically implicate or hint that, must be Cuba or somebody else, but that our CIA, they didn't do it. Nobody on the U.S. side was involved. It was not a coup
Mhm.
generated by the U.S.
Mhm. Wow. This.
So the idea that the original ruling of how long those documents would have to be kept secret out of the millions and millions of pages, they're
Right.
down to a few thousand now. But those few thousand are damning because every individual possibly involved from the US government, going back to the 50s and 60s, anybody who might have been involved in coordinating, helping, cover up, whatever, um, as long as any of them were alive, the documents were to be maintained sealed. But one
Mhm.
of the very last ones to die is President H.W. Bush, just within the last couple of years.
Mhm.
So you had documents that talked about that he really worked for the CIA in the early 60s. When he testified later, when he was nominated to be director of the CIA, have you ever worked for the CIA? He lied. And they didn't want that to come out, that he had been working for the CIA previously, or that Oswald was working for the FBI slash CIA slash military intelligence at the
Mhm.
time of his so-called defection to the Soviet Union. So
Mhm.
all of these documents that are being withheld now aren't protecting any individual anymore. They're all dead.
Right.
But it's protecting the deep state. It's protecting the CIA,
Mhm.
military intelligence, somewhat the FBI, although Hoover was more of an obstacle to them covering it up, but
Mhm.
and the U.S. military. Everything
Mhm.
that came about later
Mhm.
that Kennedy was against when it came to the invasion of Bay of Pigs at the time in '61, but then later the troops going into Vietnam. So
Mhm.
that is what many of the experts think that's what happened. Now, Trump in 2016, he was under the documents were by law supposed to be released 2017
Mhm.
while he's president. Lo and behold, he gets a visit at the White House from Mike Pompeo. And all of a sudden, Trump says later, um, what he learned from that meeting caused him to decide not to release the rest of the files.
Mhm.
He hasn't. He just said, if you saw what I saw, you would agree it was the right thing. Well, what did he see? We don't know.
Mhm.
So then they changed the date to be later to come up under Biden. Well, he's not releasing it. So you still have all of these documents that were supposed to be released 2017. They're
Mhm.
still locked up.
So this is the something that every one of them try to cover
Yeah,
because right. So
protect the CIA. Now,
right.
Trump says he was all set to release him. He gets this visit at the White House from Pompeo, and I think one other person was with him.
Right.
What did they tell him? What did they show him? That
Mhm.
Trump decides, I'm not going to do it. Now, Trump loves his family, his children,
Mhm.
the daughters, you name it. So did they threaten them? Did they could have come in with an iPad and showed the Zapruder film with Kennedy's head exploding and basically saying, Mr. President, we wouldn't want this to happen to you.
Right.
And you wouldn't want this to happen to somebody in your family.
Mhm.
Would you like to see Ivanka's head explode? Would you want any of that to happen? So that could have been the coercion that was used with Trump, that he has other people's lives in his hands.
Right.
So if he just maintains coverage of not releasing those documents or the information in those documents, let the conspiracy theories, abide, and then he'd be safe and his family'd be safe.
Right. So it's another interesting question follow up is so what changed? What changed? Because he right now said, I will release the document. So we'll see.
Good question.
Yeah. So
Good
we'll
question.
yeah. Well,
Once again, that's what he said in 2016 and then didn't do it.
mhm.
So he's saying it now. Maybe he will, maybe he won't. We don't
Right.
know. We don't
Right.
know.
Yeah, because CIA is such a powerful and special agent. In some ways, CIA shaped the US of today, right?
Oh, absolutely. The
Of the
CIA
USA.
was technically created in 1947. The
Mhm.
National Security Act of 1947 creates the CIA and the other components of the U.S. intelligence community. And there's about 11 or 12 agencies, includes the FBI, the Defense Department agencies that are involved in intel. So that's all part of that community.
Mhm.
Now, up until President George Bush, the
Mhm.
head of the CIA was the head of the community.
Mhm.
And then they decided after 9/11, that's a big, to be the manager of the agency itself.
Mhm.
personnel issues, other issues that come up, budget issues with CIA, he shouldn't be responsible for the other 12 agencies.
Right.
So we should create the Office of Director of National Intelligence, DNI. And the DNI then will determine, you know, how many people are assigned to each agency, the staffing levels, the budget levels, and all of that. And the CIA director should be just worried about the CIA.
Mhm.
But the only problem is that going back to 1947, under every president, the CIA has committed a coup somewhere in the world. Now, the idea that they may have assassinated Kennedy means that would be their biggest coup ever, the United States.
Mhm.
Some people suspect that they were also responsible for setting up Richard Nixon
Mhm.
to, to face the impeachment and to get him out of office.
Right. Right.
So, we have less information publicly on that.
Right.
But, you take all of these governments in Africa, in South America, in Asia. Um, Kennedy is barely president when the CIA takes out the president of South Vietnam,
Mhm.
assassinate him. Um, and as recently, maybe more recently, but the most recent that we know of positively, 2014, they committed a coup to take out the duly elected president of Ukraine
Mhm.
because he was too pro-Russian, wanted to make peace with Russia,
Right.
um, and basically threatened him. So he fled, and
Mhm.
that's where we got these puppet governments since, currently Zelensky.
Mhm. Mhm.
And so that's typical of what they do: overthrow a government so that the policies will be the way we want them.
Mhm. That's right. Wow, a whole lot of information. Thank you so much, Tom. Um, so when we learn more about the history, it help us to see more clear about today's world, today's USA, where it comes from, where the troubles and where the corruption comes from. Its deep roots in the
Typically, when it comes to that kind of information, it typically comes out later. Historians discover, oh, by the way, you
Mhm.
know, all of this information comes out.
Right.
So in 1963, Americans didn't know that we were sending people to the Soviet Union pretending to be defectors. That wasn't common. Now, these things all come out over time.
Mhm.
People talk about them
Right.
or discuss that they were in that program or whatever. Or, for instance, with Kennedy, most people didn't know that at the time in the early 60s, Bobby Kennedy was recruiting the mafia in Chicago, being led by Sam Giancana,
Mhm.
to send assassins to Cuba to kill Castro.
Whoa.
It was a huge U.S. plot to kill Castro. It
Mhm.
just were unsuccessful, one thing or another, bad luck. The poisons didn't work. Whatever it was that they
Mhm.
didn't effectively take out Castro.
Mhm.
Castro was well aware. Now, they were aware that Castro was aware
Mhm.
that our government was trying to kill him. So that's why initially, when Kennedy is assassinated, people that weren't involved in the assassination, other people that were knowledgeable of the plot to kill Castro, thought Castro's probably behind this.
Mhm.
He's getting even with us for trying to kill him, which would have been true.
Right.
So that's the kind of activities. You look at all these governments that we tried to overthrow or did overthrow, the
Right.
number of coups that were involved. So
Just like Trump said, I will release the document and see what we can learn from it. We'll see. Okay, yeah, we have some friends say hi to you and thank you so much for Tom for sharing the great information and it's very educational. So let me
thank
see.
you.
Let's see any questions. Oh, hi Tom. Thank you for the show. Love your shows. Thank you.
Well, thank you. Appreciate that.
Yeah. All right, so we're talking about very important issues from actually current issue and history, and it's in some way connect with each other, and also it's a simple to show how terrible when the government grab the power. It's gonna kill everyone. So
The
most
problem is that the real problem is that we are supposed to have a dedicated, honest, professional press, journalists.
mhm,
And the founding fathers talk about this 250 years ago,
mhm,
that we need a press to keep the government honest, keep it clear that corruption will be exposed.
mhm,
And what we've got now is that we have a media that's really pretty much in the pocket of the government, especially the Democratic Party.
mhm.
So we don't have a completely honest press looking at these kind of issues.
Right.
And I think that's one of the biggest problems that we have. So when you have a situation, for instance, let's take recent times that everybody should be aware of.
Mhm,
If you did a survey of the American people, who's responsible for the situation right now in Ukraine? Well, it's Russia. They invaded. 2022, Putin invaded Russia. He's at fault. The Russians did it. The Russians are bad. We should go into Russia, depose Putin, break up the country, let
mhm.
BlackRock and Monsanto, you know,
Yeah.
pick up the pieces and get rich.
Mhm,
And nobody goes back to even 2014. But
mhm,
the government of the Ukraine, we took them out.
mhm,
We eliminated that.
mhm,
Zelensky, the current, in fact, he's not even the legitimate president, but
mhm,
we start this propaganda campaign with the Ukraine going back 2, 3 years now only,
mhm,
where he's the George Washington of the Ukraine. He's
mhm,
a hero. Our senators and congressmen flying Ukraine flags on their desktops in
mhm,
Congress. Oh, he's great. Oh, he's terrific. We can't send him enough money. Pay
mhm,
no attention to the tens of millions of dollars that Ukraine illegally paid to the Biden family. Oh,
mhm,
don't look at that. Just
mhm.
look at that. Biden is supporting Ukraine because the Ukraine people, government, and military are patriots, just like our George Washington.
Right.
So let's give them billions of dollars. Let's do all of this. And while we're at it, with the big oligarchs now, the donor class in the United States, the Black Rocks,
Mhm,
Monsanto, big agriculture, big pharma,
mhm,
big business, you name it, big banking,
mhm.
basically all saying, let's take apart Russia.
Right.
Let's use the Ukraine. They'll be our cannon fodder. And you
Mm,
have people, even Lindsey Graham, saying, this Ukraine war is a good deal. We aren't getting Americans killed. They're the ones getting killed. So that's good bargain for the United States. So let's go into Russia, depose Putin, divide up Russia because they have so much in the way of minerals, uranium, coal, oil, gas. Let's loot that country.
mhm,
Let's loot them. And so a lot of Americans think we went into Ukraine, uh, or the Russians, I should say, Putin went into Ukraine because he wants to conquer Europe. He's going to take the rest of the year. First Ukraine, then the neighboring countries, all the way to England, maybe even all the way to the United States. Boy, that Putin, how evil is he? And that becomes the mantra. We've got to eliminate the Russians. And since it's too hard for us, let's hire the Ukrainians to be our surrogate and do it. And so most Americans have no clue that everything about the Ukraine war that the US government has been putting out and the US media has been echoing on the government's behalf, pretty
mhm.
much a lie,
Right.
pretty much a lie. The background of the Ukraine or where they go. Now, it's interesting. In 2014, after we do the coup, at the time when Ukraine was allowed by Russia to break away and become an independent country, instead of one of the Soviet countries, now it's on its own. So the mistake Russia made, Yeltsin and a couple others in the Russian administration, partially asleep at the switch or drunk, um, allow the Ukraine to take Crimea with them. Now, Crimea, most Americans don't realize that that's been a Russian possession for several hundred years. And in 1850, the British and the French sent a military campaign to try to eliminate Russian control of the Crimea. And in
Mm-hmm.
fact, it's called the Crimean War. Now, that's
Right.
right before our Civil War.
Mm-hmm.
So we're not in this country really paying attention, but they go in, they try to invade Crimea and take the naval base at Sevastopol in Crimea. Now, the advantage to the Russians keeping Crimea and that base
Mm-hmm.
is it's the only year-round warm weather naval base they
Right.
have.
Right.
So the rest of the Russian fleet is in the north, Murmansk, which is
Right.
under ice most of the year. So it's
Mm-hmm.
great for their submarines. They can come out under the ice. They don't have to be
Mm-hmm.
on the surface. But the
Right.
surface fleet needs warm water, or
Mm-hmm.
at least not frozen water.
Right.
And that's what they have in Sevastopol. So Putin, when he realizes in 2014 that we've overthrown the government that he was cooperating with, they had great relationships. When that government leaves, he's looking at we better get Crimea back under our control again. It used to be ours for hundreds of years. It still needs to be ours. That's why Putin took Crimea so
Mm-hmm.
that he could have that warm weather naval base, Sevastopol, in the Black Sea. That gives him the outlet then to go, all the way to the Mediterranean through the connecting rivers and seas. But in any event, most Americans don't know any of that.
Mm-hmm.
They don't know what we did in 2014.
Right.
They don't know, by the way, that there are several uh, a Minsk Accord, Minsk One, Minsk Two, other um, diplomatic meetings that are
Right.
held
Mm-hmm.
where it's agreed basically that we're going to buy time for Ukraine to build its military. Now,
Right.
later, the Chancellor of Germany, Angela Merkel, and President of France, Macron, they admit this later, like 2 years ago. Oh, yeah, we went along with that agreement to enable the Ukraine to build up its military to prepare for the invasion of Russia. They say that. Well, the problem is they didn't prepare them quite enough,
Mm-hmm.
and they didn't have quite enough because Russia was very weak at the time. They didn't have an offensive army that could have gone across Europe. They sent a couple of tanks in toward Kiev, realized they made a mistake. They can't back that up. They backed out and they go back to Russia and go into 24/7 military production. Then when they come out again, they say, now we're ready to do what we have to do in Ukraine. And they still don't want to invade Western Europe. So, but that's part of the lie that our press has told our people and most Americans watching ABC, NBC, CBS. Oh, that's great. That Putin, he's an evil monster. Well, Putin is probably, they talk about don't be a Putin apologist. Well, I'll just say this about Putin. He's run the country now for 20 years. He didn't build up their military so that he could conquer the rest of Europe and put the Soviet Union back together. He
Mm-hmm.
didn't do that. He wanted to join NATO. They refused. He wanted to join the EU when he first was in office. They refused and promised him that they would not. All he's requested all this time is don't make Ukraine part of NATO because I don't want US weapons, rockets, missiles, you name it, on my border. Just
Mm-hmm.
like we didn't want it close to our border in Cuba in 1962.
Right.
So,
Mm-hmm. Wow, this is sad. History repeats itself.
yeah.
So we see lots of similarity from right now and World War II, which is another huge topic. You know
Okay.
what I mean? So, and
Okay.
then
You ready? You ready to talk about World War II?
maybe next week we can talk about that. And
Okay.
also, I like to share with you a good book. I just got a good book, and then probably we can talk about a little bit about the book, The Founding Father, How American Developed from the first day to today. And then, yeah, I'm just thinking that there's one saying that you believe too much because you know too less. That's the thing. That's the media is doing to people. They try to create a narrative and try to tell people this is the reality, which it is not the reality, at least not the whole reality.
Right.
It's a part of the reality.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for your insight, for your wisdom, for your sharing. I really appreciate it.
Well, thank you. It's my pleasure.
Sure. So I'll translate the program into Chinese later today, and then
Okay.
I'll see you next week. Maybe we can talk about something really happened in World War II, which I'm really interesting about that because I think World War II, the aftermath is great today's world. And there are something that if we have so much lies today in front of eyes, how can we just trust the history they wrote about World War II?
Yeah. Yeah.
Thanks.
There's a lot of aspects that World War II that come up with why the policies, let's say, of Russia,
Right,
why they are so against having these weapons on their border in the Ukraine,
right,
that's a deal breaker. That is a red line that they're going to
right,
enforce.
right.
And Putin's made no bones about that fact. The Russian, he was giving, when he did the interview with Tucker Carlson,
Mm-hmm.
a lot of people criticized that why did Putin go through 300 years of Russian history, in that meeting?
Oh, that's very important to
It was
know.
very important, and most people, oh, I don't want to watch that. I don't want to hear all that, all that excuse.
Mm,
But it is very important, and
right,
it tells you the perspective of from Russia's point of view.
right.
If you go back to the 1600s, to the beginning of Russia,
Mm-hmm.
how many times have Western countries invaded Russia?
Mm-hmm.
And what was the damage done? If
Mm-hmm.
you look at World War II,
Mm-hmm.
the Russians lost 20 million people.
Mm-hmm.
We lost a million maybe,
Mm-hmm.
but their military was devastated. Their public was devastated. They lost a generation of young men,
Mm-hmm.
much like Ukraine is doing right now.
Exactly.
Um, so all of that has created this idea that they were invaded by the Swedes. They were invaded by Germans twice. They were invaded by all these different countries over the centuries.
Mm-hmm.
And they're like, can you blame us that we don't want rockets on our border now?
Mm-hmm.
Especially rockets that can hit Moscow in 8 minutes.
Mm-hmm.
It's pretty scary for them.
Exactly. So yeah, there are two sets of history. One is reality, real history, and the other one is narrative history. So you're trying to become a bridge, bring people to the narrative history to real history. But I thank you so much for that.
Well, who writes the history books?
Yeah,
The
that's the
winners usually.
yeah,
And then it takes a couple of years later for the real truth to come out.
yeah. All right. Well, thank you so much again. And I really appreciate our audience for their encouragement for us to keep doing this program. And sometimes it's some information is really hard, but if it is a reality or a fact, we need to face it.
True. I agree. I
Thank you
agree.
again, and I'll see you next week.
Okay. See you then. Thank you.